Anagalactic on an early August day, August 8th, a Thursday here in Chico, California, where we're bringing you cosmic geometry. Today, we're just going to recap where Anagalactic has come from, how it got here. Should take just a couple of minutes in order to orient ourselves toward the next phase. It is obvious that my viewership has gone down. I have a couple of videos that have gotten a few hundred views, but overall the response to my presentation platform is negligible. It's desultory. I get virtually no comments. Every now and then I get a like. I think the maximum number of likes was 9, followed by 6, and then for what? Well, it's been 26 months since Anagalactic went online at YouTube with the AEIOU channel in order to present cosmic science based on a specific discovery, which I believe I've made. I'm forced to say it that way because in science, you cannot say that you've made a discovery unless you get a consensual review, and that's statistical. So there are some discoveries which are in process of being validated or rejected. That is always the current state of science. And then we have a body of knowledge based on physical reality. I don't make those kind of discoveries to create new devices or new systems resulting in some form of engineering. And that's where I'd like to begin today, as I began 26 months ago, because I'm so inexperienced at public presentations, based on the challenges that I've overcome. But of course that's relative, that's subjective. I don't really claim to be a pro, except you might find me to be professional, which was my goal. Now you can tell, if you've been tempted to look at some of my earliest lectures, which I recommend if you're interested, my presentation technique has gone way up, way up. So the level of mastery is really relative. That's the lab cat going to her perch. What has occurred for me over the past 2 years of presentation is that my research, of course, has continued. And while producing these video series, I was making continuous progress in what I consider to be my goal-oriented approach to science. I'm always looking for solutions. That is not always the case in science. Most of science is catching up. The next generation appears and attempts to catch up with what science knows, what it has accumulated in the way of knowledge. Now, where my engagement to science latches, at least in my own view, which is somewhat typical, it's not knowledge that creates science in its final product. It's an integral part of science that we gain knowledge through discoveries, and this is cumulative. But that in itself is merely a heap of knowledge. So really, when you start speaking of what science is for, or what is it at all, it's understanding. And understanding is much, much more difficult to define than is knowledge. Knowledge is a concrete nominative referring to something we all can understand. So right away you see there's kind of an involution. Involution means a feedback system implying a loop which It's not a circular argument, but for instance, science is based on mathematics largely. Certainly in one aspect of science, it's based on measurements which are numeric. And so we have a branch of science itself that's devoted to the development of mathematical systems and tools. Algebra is different from mathematics. Arithmetic is considered to be one level down toward the foundation of mathematics would be arithmetic, but also number theory, which might sound like a contradiction. Aren't numbers the most non-theoretical thing we have in science? In one sense, perhaps that can be said. However, numbers do have a logical basis. And that is essentially one aspect of science with which we're all familiar. Certainly, men and women who go on from high school into higher education face a vast array of departments of science which are, I would have to say, virtually 100% devoted to mathematics. And that's somewhat logical based on the development of science into the 20th century, and now we're a quarter of the way through the 21st century. What has science accomplished? I think everyone is aware of the accomplishments of science in terms of technology. Now, where I'm at in the hierarchy of science is certainly not the technological side. And so a logical question arises, I believe, in anyone's mind, certainly at some phase of confronting science and engaging science. What is there to science besides technology? Can one say logically and responsibly that science is technology? Well, science is not technology. They're not identical. Science is much, much larger than technology. But I would have to be fair in saying, even against my own thesis somewhat, that technology today is science. That's all science is technology for a valid reason. It's dominant. It dominates. Where? How can I say that? I think you probably agree, but you might be wondering, is that perfectly reasonable? Am I stating the whole truth? From the point of view of someone attempting to learn science or engage science using social media such as YouTube, there are other forms besides YouTube. And when I say YouTube, I'm also referring to other video presentation platforms, of which I'm sure you've heard of a few. I have. And if I've heard of it, probably that indicates that most people have heard of it, because I'm always the last to know these things. Because I don't really care too much about technology. But when engaging science over the primary social medium, which is really the internet is what we call it, but the internet is composed of various departments, and even under the video platforms such as YouTube, which I believe is still considered to be the iconic presentation platform for science. Not only science, of course. Music, all kinds of things are presented on YouTube. And I'm an avid fan of YouTube entertainment. I could give some examples, but I don't want to be a gossip. I'm not really like Joe Rogan or even Lex Friedman. I'm quite concentrative. I'm focused on a specific aspect of science, which I claim, and have been claiming for over 2 years now, is the main thrust of science, the purpose of science, which involves some conception of humanity as a whole, because it is a collaborative and consensual and communicative effort. Science has produced demonstrable proof that it is valuable, certainly, for improving the quality of life for humans through technology. The harnessing of electricity, I believe, is all I need to say there, but also engines, dynamos, rockets are a kind of engine that get us into outer space. And science has had to keep up with technology in order to even use some forms of technology. Space travel is not possible without general relativity formulae. You may be aware of that, or that may sound reasonable if you're not fully aware of it, but it is true that special and general relativity conversions are required even to get to the moon. And that was quite a transition time in the 60s. It was 1969 that the United States succeeded in landing 2 men on the moon and getting them back home. It's always a good idea to get them back. It's quite dangerous going into space, as we're all aware, but it seems routine now. The ISS, the International Space Station, is circling the Earth, and if you weren't aware of it, you can actually just click on a site where you can look down at the Earth from the ISS camera, which operates obviously 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it's down because on each revolution of the Earth, a certain maintenance operations must be accomplished on the ISS for various reasons. And in that time, which is not long, but when you do find that site and you want to see down into the cloud cover of Earth, it's really quite dramatic. I love to. I try to check every day. I get a big kick out of it, but one out of a few times it'll say that, it's down for maintenance. Well, just wait an hour and click again. Now what'll happen then is you'll find out about the diurnal cycle of Earth is that half the time, statistically, you'll look down at just basically darkness because it's night. So you want to tune in to this video cam way up above the atmosphere, where it's looking down half the time at just blackness. Now, if it's over Europe or somewhere that's populated, you could still be entertained by seeing the city. You can see the city lights on any reasonably sized town. You'll see it going by, actually this way. And it's just fantastic to realize what's happening. And that's one of the results of science. I'd have to say that's mightily impressive. And if you're an astronomer, and by astronom interested in astronomy, why, you can see photographs of Saturn, its moons, its rings, all the other planets. There are photographs of deep space objects such as galaxies, which is what got me into science to begin with in my 50s. I'm now 70 years old, minus 2 months. I know I don't look it, and I don't feel it either. I feel quite young and fresh, but 70 is 70, no matter how you dice and slice it. So this has been quite an enjoyable journey for me. I've been into science for 16 years, since my wife died of cancer. And I've gone into that in some of my presentations, some of which are devoted to, who's this guy? So you might or should want to know, depending on your attitude. I just assume that that's part of what I need to present is, who am I? Where do I fit into science? Well, it's quite an interesting question, even to me, even to this day. Where do I fit? And it has to do, the nature of the question involves this the extant situation in science. What is it? Well, it's perceived as technology. That's a fair statement. But those who study science not vocationally but avidly, that is, a real amateur science is not just dabbling. It's not just for entertainment. You're looking for something. Now, science itself is not sure what it's looking for, so I think any one of us can be forgiven for not being perfectly clear, even in our own mind, what we're searching for, but we have a pretty good idea of what we're searching for. It's understanding of reality. And you know perfectly well that there are two sides to that. For any human, there are two, and only two, exactly two, means of approaching reality. One of them is familiar to all of us. You grow up. You learn. Well, that's progressive acquaintance with reality, but it starts out as pure emotion. And I've gone over that so many times, but it's worth repeating just summarily. That one aspect of science is absolutely natural and requires no overhead at all. If you're alive, you're learning about reality. So science is quite peculiar that way, and this is how I approach it from the point of view of our onboard systems. How do we come to understand reality? Well, we have sensoria, our eyes, ears, and ways of measuring our environment. Primarily visual. Now, as I've said before many times, this by no means leaves out blind people. People who are blind are almost equivalently, I mean, obviously there is a deficiency in the eyes are not receiving light so as to process light the way other humans are able to process light. But the nature of our system, our mind, or however you want to categorize how we relate to the universe, you begin with the senses, of course, but that is by no means the locus of understanding, even without having use of the eyes. Blind people are incredibly, I mean, I'm continuously amazed at what blind people can do. Blind people can learn to ride a bicycle, and they can navigate by clicking with their tongue and echolocating its sonar. I've seen it. It's unbelievable. I'd have to say it's a bit risky. Oh, there's nothing deficient in blind people except the obvious lack of vision, but that really is not, that's not an obstacle ultimately to scientific knowledge. Now, what do we mean by that? Scientific knowledge, of course, is based on facts, measurements, data, just the facts, ma'am. Well, that's not very helpful until you interpret your data. Yes, you can figure out that the Earth is round, that is, it's spherical, by noticing that when a ship comes up from the horizon, that you can see its sails first. And then with the passage of time, as it's approaching your shore, you see the entire ship. Well, the fact that you could only see its topmost portion, the sails, first, is proof that the Earth is spherical, and this was known to the ancient Greeks. So you might wonder how come the Europeans for a while were convinced or believed that the Earth was flat. Well, that has to do with human history, which is quite an interesting journey. Today, modern people are much more aware of the nature of scientific progress. Even someone as far away as New Guinea at any time might look up and see a jet passing overhead. Well, now you're in the jet age. And if you're looking up at night from the deepest part of Australia, perhaps, and you see this light going through the sky at night, you are now in the space age. So we do have to, and that, of course, has led us in all directions: geology, biology, chemistry. Oh my goodness, so many provinces of science. Well, it's wonderful, is it not? I think we're all vastly impressed. It's deeper than that, and I just want to touch on the philosophical side for just a moment, so as not to leave it out. We're in a state of awe. We're in a state of wonder. We're amazed. And it goes deeper than that. It goes all the way to the religious side of life. And I don't want to scare you. I'm not going to introduce some kind of strange cult or something like that. But although they exist, and the connection of humans with the universe goes, we never tire of the philosophical ramifications of that and the religious ramifications. All right, so where do I fit? I consider science to be the result of the second onboard system programmed by DNA. Programmed by DNA is an abbreviatory way of saying something a little bit more complex. We have a DNA blueprint that has been discovered. It was discovered in the 1950s and developed through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, so that today, 40 years after the 1980s, it is fairly reasonable to say that we know everything there is to know about DNA. Now, purists will immediately, get riled. Oh, we don't know everything, we only know a fraction. Oh, that's much more reasonable to say. So why would I say that we know everything there is to know? Because that's an incomplete statement. That's why I need to complete my statement to make it reasonable in any way. We know everything we wanted to know about DNA so as to make an accurate statement about human origin. And on that topic, I have been a scientist since the age of 17, and I have never desisted in my pursuit of that side of science. It's very particular. It's very specific. It has nothing to do with the stars. It has nothing to do with quantum mechanics. What it has to do with is who are we? Who are we as humans? Now that is not what I deal with primarily on this channel. I'm into cosmic science, which is today a combination of astronomy and cosmology, which is an extension of astronomy, of course, but also the nature of light, which is where we get all of our information about the universe, indicating that insofar as possible, we should try to understand what is light. It's just a natural human desire. We want to understand our environment. Well, the first question that a rational man will ask, and all of us do at some phase, is where am I from? Where am I from? Well, you're from mommy and daddy, we know that. How? Science is very forthright. It's genetic recombination. It's recombinant DNA molecules. That's what makes a new human. And you know the whole story of the DNA strands, the semiotic strands of recombinant DNA. when the two gametes meet, this would be inside a woman for the human race, or a female for any of the other cellular creatures. The two gametes merge, and what happens inside is that the specifically formed molecules of recombinant DNA unwind. Both of them do. They unwind into two strands, and one each of those strands is discarded, and the two strands rewind, and then begins what's called the semiotic process. It's an ontological development that from this one cell, it now has a new DNA strand composed of the two strands that are really half strands that now recombine to make a full strand, and that is a blueprint. So that's what I mean by the DNA blueprint. Now, what a rigorous scientist asks, either out loud or to himself, either in a class, raise your hand, is like, or to yourself, what does this mean? Very natural question. A recursive question, you're going backwards to get the cause. Where does the blueprint come from? If anyone could answer that question, it would enlighten all of humanity. Because, of course, the first question a human asks on becoming an adult is, where am I from? Now, there are actually several questions that are coordinated there. Not only do we ask, where am I from? And the order may be different for different people. You ask, where does the solar system come from? Where do planets come from? Where do stars come from? Well, you know, that goes out. It's a form of recursion, but it's outward. And finally, as you know, it's resulted in the very natural question, where does the universe come from? Where does everything come from? All right. So there's a lot of different origin questions. Well, these are the most critical questions of all. And so the most critical question from one aspect in that category of origin questions, where is it from? The top of the list is, where are humans from? If anybody could answer that, it would make headlines all over the world and change the face of society, education, and the future of mankind. The strange and wonderful report on that is, nobody has the slightest idea where humans are from. Nobody has ever come up with a theory of human origin. Nobody knows. Nobody even knows where to begin. So we have no answer to that question. Science is just baffled. And you know that your scientists are so honest and so good. Because they're educated, they'll always tell you the truth. And so all scientists, being humble before the enormous face of the universe and the almost complete lack of knowledge that humans have about the universe, of course, our beloved worshipful scientists, almost without exception, will tell you the truth. We don't know where humans are from. I have no idea where we came from. So I hope that little bit of prolonged sarcasm gives you an idea of the rage that I feel, the fury. In some contexts, it's called righteous indignation. You cannot have authoritative men allowed to speak to children, to the youth, or even to other full-grown men about their goddamned opinions about where men are from. You can do that if you're in religion. Religion. Or its close ally, philosophy. That's okay to talk about your stupid ideas about where humans are from. And they are stupid. Well, what does science actually have to say? Have we discovered anything in the 20th century into the 21st century which might cast any light whatsoever on where humans come from? Yes. Yes. We now know where humans are from. Who's we, white man? That's my mother's expression. It must be an ancient Scottish expression. Oh, I don't know. But that's what she would say. Who's we, white man? Well, it's a well-formed question. When you say we, who's we? What is it? Who's we? Well, in this case, you have to distinguish yourself from that herd. We never identify with we. You are not we. You are you. And you're responsible, at least to yourself, for your final views on what is reality. In this case, the reality of human origin. It's easily proved. It doesn't even require proof. Of course humans come from somewhere, somehow, something, some process, some position in time. Or I should not position in time, although it would be a position on Earth, that there was the first human, right? Well, of course, that much is fully known. The human blueprint has never changed. Now, there are footnotes there that you might be interested in. Why are there different characteristics to humans? On a broad scale, you can say that there are three major types of humans just based on skin coloration. There are the whites, who are approximately 10 to 15% of the Earth population. There are the blacks, and they're also about 15% of the human population. The rest, which is about 70%, are brown. And a little more than half of the brown people are oriental with a specific eye shape. And the rest there are the people of India who are quite distinct. And then there are the Semitic people who are brown, but they're not Chinese and they're not Indian. They're Semitic. So what does that mean? It means that they're descended from Abraham. Now, that is an historical fact. That is not religion, although Abraham is a religious character. As you go back in time, the characters tend to become more and more religious. Well, because the nature of record keeping back in the early stages of civilization was mostly based around religious considerations. Now, obviously, we're not talking about astronomy or physics here. We're talking about the most important question in science. Nothing else really matters. A case can be made, and I'm making a case. It's somewhat artificial. This could be shot full of holes. But I want you to consider a certain aspect of reality. That you're human, okay? You're human. Well, what does that mean? You have to then ask the question, where are you from? Well, you're from mommy and daddy, and I'm sorry, but this is really the birds and bees truth. And half of your mommy and half of your daddy recombined and made you. Was somewhat miraculous, I'd have to say, but just skipping over that miraculous process, where do mommy and daddy come from? That's not That's not being a pain in the neck. That's not being the class clown. That's asking the question that needs to be answered first. So that's actually a mathematical sequence. Because you're one, your parents are two. Well, they came from two parents each, that's four. That's called a geometric progression. But it has a strange convergence because currently there are about 8 billion living people, and that is approximately, based on one reasonable extrapolation, that's about half of all the humans that have ever lived. And that's reasonable, and a moment's thought should convince you of that. Now, there is a hole in that has been exploited by certain theorists, which is that at any time in this sequence of 8 to 4 to 2 to 1 to get you go backwards. This 1, 2, you're going backwards in time. You have 4 ancestors, 8. Okay. How many ancestors are there? Well, for you, it goes... How do you do that? That's a very interesting... Well, this is pure mathematics and geometry. Well, I mean, it's a geometric progression. But it's a form of mathematics. You're extrapolating numbers. You're 1, your parents are 2, your grandparents are 4, and where does that go? Does it go to infinity? There used to be an infinite number of people? No. So what's going on? Well, without going into the details, which would perhaps be brought out in some classroom in order to obtain completeness and closure, I'm just going to cut to the chase, which I think you'll be grateful for. I know I will, because I don't want to have to explain all that, although I wouldn't mind in context. When you go back far enough, you find that the population of the Earth overall is less and less. That makes sense. Currently, there is on the order of billions. If it gets to 10 billion, which it will, it's said within a few decades, there will be 10, then you would say it's the order of 10 billion. All the way up to 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 billion. That's the order of 10 billion. This is just a shorthand. Currently, we're at the order of billions. But only a century ago, it was hundreds of millions. That's only a century ago. It's one order less. Well, how far back in time do you have to go down one more order? To millions. That's a long time ago. Well, what do I mean by a long time ago? Thousands of years ago. There were only millions of people on the Earth. And if you extrapolate backwards, and this is rigorous, although it's statistical, so we're not sure about durations, where the population can fluctuate. Some say over periods of millions of years. Well, that's ridiculous. And here's why. The human race cannot possibly be millions of years old. Here's why. If you go back a century, you go down in order from on the order of billions to on the order of hundreds of millions. If you go back 2 centuries, or 3 or 4, actually more like 1,000 years. Or 2,000 years. It's rather difficult to estimate the Earth's population in the past. But one thing we can definitely say, it was less and less. So, how far back can we read? Well, we rely very strongly on written records back to about 6,000 years. It's 5,000 or 6,000 years. And then there are no more written records. Now, there are footnotes to all these things, but broadly speaking, this is accurate. And back then, there were, at most, an order of millions of people. Well, you can extrapolate backwards from that. At one time, there must have been only a tribe of hundreds of people. And if you extrapolate backwards, eventually you get back to 2. And that's just based on what we know of genetics. You have to have a mommy and a daddy. Well, then you're stuck. You're facing a contradiction now. Because there has to be a male and a female in order to produce the next generation. Now, this has been known for a long time. I'm not making any of this up. None of this is philosophical. This is strict science. Absolutely as strict as you can get in biology and anything having to do with the past. But what makes it so compelling is that it is by far the most important question that humanity is capable of asking. The origin of the universe is secondary. The origin of the earth is secondary. Even the origin of the ecology is secondary, but I don't consider it to be secondary. And here's why. In order for there to be mommy and daddy and baby, the very first 3 humans, mommy and daddy, actually, you'd have to have 4. You'd have to have mommy and daddy, and then son and daughter. But really, to begin the progression, well, then mommy and daddy die, and so now there's a new mommy and daddy. So that can just go on forever, and there would just be 2 people. Because they would always produce a daughter and a son who would then marry each other. Hoo-hoo! Yes, to pure bigamy. Well, not bigamy, but whatever that's called, incest. Now that has... We're not going there, don't worry. No, we're not going into angels on a pinhead. You know, your religion versus the enemy religion. No. That's right out in science. But we are stuck with this question. So mommy and daddy, the first 2 humans, and yeah, there's a question, we're getting there, but mommy and daddy, these are scientific words, I'm sorry, but they are, produce 2 sons and 2 daughters. They each produce 2 sons and 2 daughters. So now we're going in the opposite direction. From 2 to 4 to 8 to 16, then you get to where your ancestors came from. Somewhere among these, you appear. But how, you have to reduce it because you don't come from this many people. You only come from a certain set of those. But what you can say, to just really cut through a lot of this really quickly, you are definitely descended from mommy and daddy A. So now comes the really difficult question that has ripped humanity into shreds, because nobody can answer the next question. To this day, nobody knows where mommy and daddy come from. There are stories. There are theories. There are ideas, there are philosophies, there are religions, but nobody knows. Scientifically, there is no answer. There is no way to define where humanity came from. That's unacceptable. That leaves humanity psychotic. Then humanity has no reason to exist. We have no idea why we're here. Are we having a good time? Are we having a bad time? They were the best of times and the worst of times. I think I'm misquoting that. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. I believe that's Charles Dickens. But it's a conundrum. We have this fantastic situation we call life, really. But here is what I was leading up to, which helps solve this dilemma. It gives us one more step in the ladder. This is the cosmic distance ladder only not having to do with stars, galaxies, or anything out there. It's the real cosmic distance ladder. The cosmic distance ladder going backwards in time. Where did this come from? In context, what we're asking is, well, what is this? What is you? Well, then you have to ask, what is the human race? And you get back to mommy and daddy. I refuse to say, you know what could be said there. I come from the Judeo-Christian Western tradition in my educational upbringing, with which I had no participation except to be brainwashed with it. So you could say it's a superstitious point of view, or you could say it's a religious point of view, but I did not make up the preferred solution for at least a couple of thousand years, more than that, more like 4,000 years. You'd have to restrict it to a certain group of humans who left records. These would be the Semites, who left the very first records of what humans thought about themselves. Where do we come from? Well, you've heard of Adam and Isha, and that's how it's always said, because people are very smart, and our scientists who talk about these things never want to mislead you in any way. I'm getting sarcastic again, of course. But it's Adam, that's daddy, and Isha, that's mommy. Mommy got her name changed after she gave birth. So, mommy was later called by a different name. But her first given name, according to the Semitic record, is that her name was Isha. Isha. And the daddy's name was Adam. Now that's logical. These two human beings definitely existed. Whether they're the two humans in the story, I mean, you would have to know your sources to believe the story. But according to the story, there's one more step in where mommy and daddy came from. They came from a non-human source. Now today, in more scientific, that is, non-religious context, just the facts, just the facts, just the facts, well, science has extrapolated backwards to see if it could come up with a more rigorous definition than the one given in the Semitic record about Adam and Isha. Can science say anything further or better to give us an idea of how to proceed in the most important question of all? Inside or out of science? For every human being, certainly for a full-grown man, you're blueprinted to seek that answer. That's why we seek that answer. It's because it's natural to us to do so. Well, that means that's part of the blueprint. We're meant to ask that question, and depending on your point of view of ultimate logic and reason, you might be urged in your own mind to insist, and this is my position, you will be able to get the answer. But then it gets really difficult, because let's say you learn the answer on your own. Now, I don't know of anybody who has done this, but there might be. But why would we then not have heard of these people who have the answer? It's because you have to communicate your answer. And that's where science begins, is the ability to communicate. It's not the ability to measure or glean data, facts, and measurements. You could say that that's part of the basis, of course, but that's not where it begins. Where it begins is What is motivating you? It's your blueprint, your DNA blueprint. That can be proved, by the way. We all share this. So we must get the answer. That's the bottom line. We have to know where we're from or we can't know anything. If you knew the origin of the universe, it would do you no good if you don't know where you're from. Let's say, tomorrow it's in all the headlines. Oh my God, the scientists have discovered the actual origin of the universe, the galaxies, the stars, our own planet. We know everything now. What good would it do you? Nothing. It wouldn't do you any good at all. Because you don't know who you are. You have no idea what you're doing. Well, that rankles a rational man. It's supposed to rankle. You don't want to be a child. You don't want to be told what to believe. You want to know what is reality. That is science. Although, you see, I already have at least 3 definitions of science. They're combined. They're combinative. We have to know where humans are from. That's a must. There's no way around that. And unless you do know where humans are from, you don't know anything else. That's the state of science today. It's temporary, grandiose knowledge. It's based on pride and, of course, on survival, money. That's science today. That's not real science. Because science is not producing any answers. It's not producing any answers because it cannot get the answer to the first question. So no progress has been made. Humanity is exactly what it was at origin. No progress, no evolution, no nothing. Just a bunch of hairless pseudo-apes. And that's where I became involved with science a half a century ago. It wasn't even strictly speaking biology. It was simply the one and only question that science has ever had to begin with, which if you don't get that, all you're doing is wasting your time. Because if you die without knowing where you're from, you're no better than an ant. Let me ask you something as we close this now. Are you any different from an ant? Now, ultimately, and I'm just going to warn you here, only you can answer that. And when you do, you won't be able to share it. Now, the art of science is getting the right answer from logic and then being able to communicate it. That's what I do. And I am the last of the race of men who is attempting to do that. As far as I can tell, I am alone. And how so? Let's be exact about this. What is this channel that I have on YouTube? What am I doing? What do I say about my platform? My message? My version of science? What is it? It's to give you transcendental understanding of universal reality. Let me say that again because we're going to close on this. I am the only presenter on public media who is doing science the right way. And the definition of the right way is to provide transcendental understanding of universal reality. What's the point of that? It's so that when you face death, as you will not be afraid. That is in the Bible! We'll be right back.